We're going to talk to you about the African American Endowment Fund and why this work is critical to the health and vibrancy of the residents of Washtenaw County. Hi, I'm Shannon Polk. Thank you for listening to Brick by Brick, a podcast by the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. Again, this is part 2, and at the table with me, I have Faye Askew-King, Janet Haynes, and David Barfield. Thank you all again for being part of this conversation. Could you all share with me a little bit about the history of the African American Endowment Fund? I want to just kind of set the stage for this in the fact that as part of our current strategic plan, we are focused on 5 areas: economic empowerment, impact investing, college degree attainment, and healthy and fulfilling aging. But the 5th pillar of that is around racial equity. And that is in part as when we look at the data across Washtenaw County, when you parse that data, what you see is that Black and brown people are still faring worse, whether we're talking about educational outcomes, health outcomes, access to capital, and it doesn't matter whether those folks are living in Ann Arbor or they're living in Ypsi or they're living in other parts of the county, they're still faring worse. And so we have taken a stand and said we are going to work to reduce those disparities, where we can work to reduce the wealth gap. And so I know that you all have been involved in different degrees with the African American Endowment Fund, which I think is so amazing that it has been around for over 25 years, and the work that's being done in that commitment. So I'd like for us to just have a conversation about the history of it and why it's still so relevant today. Jan, I'm going to turn to you because I believe you had some initial conversation, certainly as the chair of the fund. Would love to hear your comments.
Well, I was thinking about this the other day of how the fund actually started. And if we go back to the early 1990s, Willis Patterson, who is a professor emeritus of the School of Music and also born and raised in Ann Arbor, was a trustee, one of 3 Black trustees for the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. And Willis became aware of an African American Endowment Fund, and I can't remember if it were the Cincinnati Fund or if it was a different fund, but it was one of either the first or early Black endowment funds that were in existence. And so he became aware of that. And as a trustee on the foundation, he and 2 other people, Barbara Meadows and Joe Doolin, the 3 of them were trustees and the only Black trustees on the foundation at the time. He brought that information or that idea to them, who then in turn thought that this is something that we need to do for the Black community. And so brought that to the larger trustee body. And the foundation agreed that it was something that was very much needed in the community and supported the idea to the point of offering, I think it was to match the first $50,000 that was raised towards starting this fund. So there was a group of people, and I can't remember how many, I think there was like 30 of us in the room. And the meeting was held at Jim Bradley's auto dealership. And Jim Bradley was one of the first, I believe, Black dealerships in the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And so Jim offered his facility, and there were probably, like I said, 30 of us from the community that came together to listen to Willis and Barbara and Joe talk about the possibility of this fund, and as a community, what we were able to do in terms of supporting the fund. And so it's interesting that, as Faye said earlier, Black people have been philanthropers for decades, for centuries. I mean, we've always given, maybe not just our money, but of our time and our energy to helping each other in the community. And so we were talking about this, and many of us didn't understand what an endowment fund was. So black people giving money, we want that dollar to go to where that dollar can go, not 90 or 20 cents of that dollar going and the 80 cents of it going into a pot. And so having that explained was a very interesting conversation. But also, this was the one thing that I did remember. My husband, who was white, and I sometimes say was, when I talked about him in the past, he still is, even though he's deceased. Paul was an investment counselor for physicians and dentists in private practice and group practice. And his question was, the foundation body was white. Who was going to make the decisions on where these funds were going to go? Who was going to be those decision makers? Was it going to be these trustees that really don't know anything about the black community? Or is it going to be a body of folks that have more interest and visibility and also live in the community and understand the community? And so that made for some very interesting discussions around the table as to what we, how we're going to approach this. And in his mind, who's going to be controlling my money that I'm going to give? But that was the beginning of it, and I think a year or two later there was a major, or maybe not even a year later, a major fundraiser, and we raised over the $50,000 that was needed. And then a second fundraiser that was given that raised more money. And in 95, I believe, or 96, we were able, as the distribution committee, and it was all black folks involved in that distribution committee, we were able to give our first grants. And I think there were maybe 3 or 4. And we didn't have a lot of money, but I think that we ended up giving out maybe about $3,000 or $4,000. And that was the start of where we were. And it was just an incredible experience to know that what we were doing was helping ourselves and helping others, and it was not just Ann Arbor, it was also Ypsilanti that was being benefited by the funds that were being raised. And that has been our mission, to make sure that we are helping those nonprofit organizations that's doing such important work in the black and brown community.
Faye, when you think about it and you think about endowment, can you share a little bit? It was so great to hear you talk about endowment when I listened to it before. Just incredible.
I think it's a concept that is really hard, like Janet was saying. In the black community, we're used to giving to the church and seeing how that money is immediately distributed and how it's helpful. I think even as we have convinced people to donate to an endowment, it is an education. It is a different way of thinking about building wealth in a philanthropic kind of way. And that while we are giving to a fund, this fund is going to continue to invest dollars so that in the future we will still have money to give. And it's a long-term strategy versus a short-term strategy. And I think that once you can help people see that, then it makes sense to them. It lasts longer. It's like those S&H green stamps, that used to exist. You start small, but you build. And when your book is filled, then you have more money than you had when you first started to purchase and do things. And so I think, if you can explain it to people in that way, they get it.
Certainly. Yeah. David, how did you get connected with the fund?
So I got involved maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And again, I got involved as a result of my father's efforts to assist and support the organization. I don't know all of the history, but I believe they came to him looking for ways to raise funds. He was a very aggressive fundraiser. He was also a very impatient individual and a very proud person. And what that meant is he wanted big dollars. He wanted to get to the point of self-sufficiency where he no longer had to beg for help, and he wanted to get it done quickly. So he worked with the distribution committee, and they embarked on a plan to take the fund from where they were, maybe a couple $100,000 at the time, to $1 million. And I think that opened a lot of eyes, primarily because it was a big number, and there was not necessarily a path to get there. He established it as a goal and was able to sell it as a goal that was ultimately adopted. And the planning for how to get to this point, how to get to that target started. Unfortunately, he passed away before a plan was put into effect. And as he was becoming weaker and weaker, one of the things that he asked me to do is to help me keep the promise that he made to help them, endowment fund, take their balance from where it was to $1 million. So I got involved as a result of that. I contacted Janet and said, I've got some work to do. And we sat and talked about how we might achieve this goal, and I committed to, doing everything that I could to help us get to that point.
Can you all share a little bit of some of the grants that have gone out from the fund?
Oh, gosh. Wow.
Well, Mentor to Youth is one that I think of first. It was started by an African American male who saw a need to really mentor and support African American males to increase their academic performance. And I think about that as one of the grants that we supported early on, because the mission was something that was clearly central to what it is that we thought the endowment should be doing.
Community Action Network is one that I think of, and that one goes back to the two founders was Nancy Bogan and Kathy Baldwin, and Kathy was a member of my church, the Church of the Good Shepherd, and a lot of the programming was done at our church as well as being done at High Cone, which is where CAN was primarily established. I was also on the board and was board president of CAN many years ago, and we watched CAN as it grew and grew and grew and incorporated Green Baxter as well as High Cone, and now I understand, I think that Brian is also part of that. But I look at where CAN was when it first started and the impact that it had on the children in High Cone and how it has grown and what it has done over the years for all three of those communities. So that's one that I think of right away. I think of A Brighter Way because of what they are doing with men and women, but primarily men that are re-entering society from being incarcerated. And that's, I see that one as a very, very important work that is being done in the community. There's been Girls Group. There is, we were early contributors to Sphinx when Sphinx was first getting started. We've done a lot with Alzheimer's. We've done work with the Heart Association. We've done, I'm probably losing it. Early one, we did aquademics. That was one of the first ones that we did. We also did the learning one that Lucille Porter did, which was the of the beginning of the Ann Arbor Festival, downtown festival, that the African American Festival that is being held. We funded that for 2 or 3 years in a row when it was first started. So those are just some. I can't remember.
Sure. I think about Park Ridge Community Center.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
And the reason for me that's important is, one, it's right in the center of the neighborhood where I grew up. Mm-hmm. It's across the street from where my mom was born. But most importantly, it is a community center that is sitting in the middle of the most disadvantaged part of Washtenaw County, which is the south side of Ypsilanti that we spoke about in the first portion of this podcast. And it is a community center that has transformed into an educational center to be able to provide the residents of that community access to all sorts of services, including academic support and after-school programming to keep these children off the streets after the school day is done.
Yeah, we have funded Park Ridge quite a few times. And also, I can't remember the pool. Rutherford Pool, yes. We have funded programming that they've done there.
I think what the Endowment Fund has really tried to do is fund those projects that would not be funded by the broader funders in this community, like the United Way, for example. It's a need that we are able to recognize and support in ways that the larger funders don't support.
Yeah. And Janet, I think the comment you made earlier about Paul's question of who's going to make the decision, there are so many organizations out there with the big logos that just attract a lot of attention and a lot of resources. But inside of our community, there are very, very small organizations where $500 or $1,000 go a long way.
A long way,
and
yes.
the impact that they have on the community at large are great. Yeah. And many of these organizations are unknown or not very well known, are not necessarily the flashiest, but they have tremendous impact.
Yes.
So I think the distribution's awareness and ability to understand and address the needs of some of these organizations is great. And what I think is really great about the campaign is we're now getting to the point that we can respond to you can respond to in a positive way, close to, if not 100% of the requests, and support those organizations in some instances with more than they've asked for to continue to promote their good work.
The last 2 years we were able, thanks to David and Jeff, who were our co-chairs in the fundraising effort, the last 2 years we were able to give over $15,000. And I think last year our giving was about $18,000. And so that impact, I mean, if we're looking at one organization that just needs $2,000 or $3,000, we're able to give them all that they need in order for them to do the programming that they are wanting to do. And in a couple of cases, we were so impressed with the program that came to us by an organization that we had enough money to give everybody what they needed, and we had money left over, so we gave a little bit more to an organization to make sure that program that they were going to do was successful.
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about the campaign, because there was a strategy that was put in place to get from where we were to $1 million. So I worked with the distribution committee and really requested an opportunity to engage a partner in this. And Jeff is not with us today for this podcast, but I think we'd be remiss to not recognize the efforts. And it was a very intentional effort to bring together multiple communities to reach this goal. And it wasn't just funders that were black, but white and other ethnicities as well. But we really tried to put together a community-based approach to get this done. And what I'm most proud about is, as I checked our balance yesterday, is we are roughly $50,000 away from reaching our goal. And the commitment from the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation to offer that last $50,000 in the form of a gift is significant to me, because it was that partnership that established the fund, and it's that partnership that will help us cross this finish line in time for the goal that we set, which is 2025. What's most important to me is that will result and should result in a minimum of $50,000 annually going through the decision process from the distribution committee. Mm-hmm. So from taking it from the $3,000 to $4,000 that you talked about when the fund was initially established to probably north of $50,000 in years to come, I think is a wonderful accomplishment. It would not have been realized without the efforts of so many people and so many donors that gave, donors large and small, and it certainly would not have been possible without the partnership of the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. So Shannon, thank you for your championing that cause and recognizing how important it was for you all to be a partner in that.
Right. And what's special to me is that these organizations that we have supported, they have to report on their outcomes and their goals, and that they have been successful, that they have been able to do what they said they were going to do. Mm-hmm. And so they are making an impact that can be documented. And for me, that's very important.
Certainly.
And for me, what David just raised too about the donors, we have had, it's important to say that we've had donors that have given to the endowment fund since its inception. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these donors are giving $25, $50, $100. It's not just the $2,000 and $3,000 and $5,000 that has kept us going. It's those little commitments that are so very, very important. So we truly appreciate those monies and those persons, as well as the big donors that are coming to us. So I just wanted to say that.
Hey, it's important. Those small, consistent donors,
that's right.
We can count on them.
That's right.
Exactly.
That $10 that we gave to the church every Sunday.
Right? I mean,
and they come fairly regularly.
Yes.
If
Yes.
you kind of take a look at the donor reports.
Yes.
And that's very, very important.
Yep.
because what we're talking about, what you all have described, are what I consider to be cornerstones of philanthropy in the Black community, right? Which is that consistent gift. It may not be huge, but it's consistent. It's coming, and there's a faithfulness. This need to partner, yes, in our community, but build broader. We always work to build a broader table. So having you and Jeff Houtman say, you know what, this isn't just an issue for the Black community. This is an issue for Washtenaw County. We're trying to improve the lives of everyone. So let's come together, because there's a line I heard that was used by Susan Taylor, former editor-in-chief of Essence magazine. And that is, she talked about the fact that we always have to understand that we have linked fates. And so we can't separate ourselves from what's happening in another part of the community, because they're like, well, that doesn't impact me. Because what's happening on the south side of Ypsilanti is going to impact me whether I live there or not. What's happening in Milan is going to impact me whether I live there or not. What's happening in Dexter is going to impact me whether I live there or not. And so by finding those partners and saying this impacts the community. You want to make sure that kids are well educated regardless of their zip code. You want to make sure that people have access to health care, that they have access to transportation, that we're addressing the digital divide, that we're making sure that there's healthy food available and accessible in these neighborhoods. That's not just a Black concern. That is a community concern. And understanding, like, hey, we're going to be supportive, but we all need to wrap our arms around this because it improves our community. And one of the things I've been talking about with folks is that the Community Foundation is a philanthropic hub, which means we're going to connect donors to causes that they care about, for the point that you raised, Faye, which is so that we can have impact on the community, measurable impact that we can see, that we can report on, that we can talk about. And so, but we do that because because we're focusing on how we help everyone in the community. But yes, so that data, and we are very data driven. So the data shows us, hey, 48197, there's an issue here, and we've got to address that. And that's really important. But I really appreciate you all taking the time to lift up those things, lift up the fact that it is a multi-ethnic coalition, right? Oftentimes when people think about the history of the NAACP, they're surprised to learn that there weren't just black people at the table. There were all kinds of people coming together saying, hey, we've got to improve this. Understanding that it started with those consistent donors all the way across, where they were giving $25 or $10, the same way that we've always given, and that we're measuring impact by what we do. It's not just giving just because someone is an African American, but we're saying, hey, look, how are you making impact in educational outcomes? How are you, and report back on that, because we want to make sure the investment we made, that it matters. We're measuring that, we're managing that, and seeing those outcomes and hearing about it. That's improvement that everyone can be excited about. Yep. Are there some other pieces about the fund that you'd like to highlight? There may not be. We covered a lot of ground, so don't feel pressure, because I've got a question coming up.
What I would want to highlight is we named the campaign "Our Community Cares," because we truly believe that if more people understood what we were looking to do and why we believed it was important, that they would want to help. And I can tell you, it was a very easy sell, whether the dollars were large or small. And there were many more small dollar contributions that added up than large. So it really was a community effort. But what it required was increasing awareness of the need and a respectful ask, and being able to point to success in the past and a track record of success, to give those donors the confidence that their gifts would be properly managed and their dollars would find their way into the community, and not only find their way into the community today, but tomorrow and in perpetuity. So I think that we talked a little bit about the challenges associated with endowment funds. We are now at a point, what I would consider at least a fairly critical mass, where we're now going to be able to, make ways for tens of thousands of dollars to find their way into the community. And I would just ask that, even though the campaign will be coming to a close, that our efforts and desire to continue to grow the endowment fund will continue.
And that's really important. I appreciated something that you said, as well as that you said, Janet, and that is that those dollars are being used to be catalytic. Because oftentimes for those organizations that are doing that work in the community that aren't as visible to larger funders, they need those initial dollars to build capacity, to help them get up to speed, to build that track record that then attracts those other funders. And we know that they're doing good work. They're just not as visible to everyone else that may be outside of the community. And it is important that people don't just say, oh, well, we gave, they reached the goal, and that's sufficient. Because what we're finding out, there's a report that the United Way puts out, the ALICE report, that tells us about those that are asset limited, income constrained. And what we're seeing is those numbers are increasing in Washtenaw County, not decreasing. So it's absolutely critical that people continue to give so the work can continue to be funded. And what I love about it is that in leading the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, we get to be that hub that allows that to happen. Whether someone's giving $10 or they're giving $50,000 or $1 million, being able to house that, ensure that it's being properly managed, properly invested, and going out in the community and doing good work and changing people's trajectory. Because there's some student there that got the tutoring support that they needed, saw someone who looked like them and is mentoring them, and they've got that role model that they can model themselves after now. They've got these investments, and I will tell you, one of my favorite stories came from the mayor of Ypsilanti, the current mayor there, who said that she would not be in her seat if it had not been for funding that came from the Community Foundation. She said there was a grant that was made that allowed her to attend a city council meeting, and it brought students in for them to learn about civic government.
Wow.
And that as a result, that really got her attention. And that she began to say, well, wow, there's something for me to do here. It changed where she decided to go to school. She decided to stay local, decided to continue. And now, having been a former council person, then running for mayor and getting elected. And that's what happens when we make these investments. Because who would have thought that the programmatic grant to allow students to attend a city council meeting would be the thing that would then have
That kind of an
amazing
impact.
Right.
Yes.
Wow.
That's the impact. And I appreciate it because it's just like an endowment, right? It's that seed that's planted that continues to grow over time, and then eventually that's the tree that we see.
And I think the foundation capturing those stories really helps people understand the true impact of their giving.
Yes. So, last question for you all. What's your favorite giving story? It may be something through the fund, or it may be something that, a story maybe from your childhood, but your favorite story about giving.
There's a lady in my church who has passed away, whose name is escaping me right now. But she was one of those small, consistent donors who, when I was writing the articles for the endowment fund about black philanthropy, I did a story on her. And she migrated here from the South. The church was always important in her community. When she came to Ann Arbor, the church was still important to her community. But she also understood the importance of donating to the African American Endowment Fund because she understood how endowments worked. And so she was one of our small, consistent donors who, she was the kind of person who gave for church. Every September gave me a little bag to give to my homeless children, and she was a small, consistent donor to the African American Endowment Fund. And so she gave on a lot of different levels, and she understood all the different places and ways that it was important to give. And so she is one of my favorites.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. Janet?
She took it.
Okay.
What's her name? Rhodes?
Geneva Rhodes.
Yes, that was her. And I was thinking exactly about her. And that Faye did write an article about her, but she was an amazing woman. And for me, it was just watching her do that spoke volumes to me because I saw that kind of action in my church as I was growing up in Chicago at Berean, that there were women in the church that were consistent givers every single week. And it might be $5, it might be $10, but you think about what they were giving, and that was, even though it was $10, that was a larger portion of their income or what they had to give than somebody that has millions and they're given 1,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. So to look at not only the fact that they were giving, but what that meant in terms of their own finances was very important.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Yeah.
I grew up with parents that constantly imposed on us the importance of supporting and giving back to the community. And from my youngest ages, I can just remember stories, and not just stories, but witnessing actions, of that. It was so impactful for me that I've really tried to make sure that my children, our children, understand the importance of giving, and not only hearing stories, but seeing actions as well. My favorite story of giving actually came from my son, Kalen. We were downtown Ann Arbor, and he had a couple of dollars in his pocket to go and spend on something. We walked into a store. He made the decision not to spend his money, and he walked by a person that was asking for money, and he gave them his money.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, to your point, that $2 was all he had in his pocket. And he gave 100% of it to someone he saw in need. So it makes me feel as though we are doing the right thing. And I am convinced that when he has children of his own, he will pass on that legacy.
Oh, these are amazing and beautiful stories. Thank you for sharing them with me. I firmly believe that when we think about philanthropy, we can't think about it without thinking about love, because the word means love of man. And we do this work because we love our fellow man, and we understand how important it is to give and care about their well-being. And that's why I'm proud to lead the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, because that is our goal. How do we improve the lives of the residents of Washtenaw County? And we do that by first leading with love. So thank each of you for being guests today. I so appreciate the stories, the information you shared, the history. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.